Come, my people. Sit down and listen to my story. It is a story about friendship that turned bad, about a man who let jealousy eat up his heart. In our village, there was a very good king called Solomon. Everyone loved him because he was kind and fair. When he was king, good things happened in our land. The farmers grew plenty of yams. The fishermen caught many fish. Nobody went hungry. Every 6 months, all the people would come together for a big celebration. They called it the Festival of Great Things. During this time, everyone was happy. The young people would dance. The old people would tell stories. The women would cook delicious food, and the men would tap sweet palm wine from the trees. But in our village, there was one man who was not happy. His name was Paul. Now, Paul and King Solomon used to be best friends when they were young boys. They did everything together. They played together in the village square. They went to the farm together. They even went fishing together. They were like two brothers from the same mother. But something happened that changed everything. When Paul and Solomon were growing up, they both fell in love with the same girl. Her name was Mary. She was the most beautiful girl in the village. Her skin was smooth like shea butter, and her smile was bright like the morning sun. One day, Paul told Solomon about his love for Mary. "My friend," he said, "I love Mary so much. My heart beats fast like a drum whenever I see her." But what Paul didn't know was that Solomon and Mary were already in love. They had been meeting secretly under the big mango tree near the stream. They would talk and laugh together when nobody was watching. Then Solomon became king of our land. And who did he marry? He married Mary. When this happened, Paul's heart turned black with anger. He stopped being Solomon's friend. Every time King Solomon sent for him to come to the palace, Paul would refuse. "Come, my friend," King Solomon would say. "Come and work with me in the palace. Let us be friends again." But Paul would just shake his head and say, "Does he think I'm a fool? Never. I will not go to his palace." Paul spent many days thinking about how to get Mary from King Solomon. He tried many things, but nothing worked. Mary was happy with Solomon, and they had 2 beautiful children. Then one day, something happened that changed everything. Paul was sitting at the village square, drinking palm wine, when a stranger came. This stranger was a trader who had traveled to many lands. He started telling stories about people who live under the water, the Mer people. "If you can get anything that belongs to these water people," the stranger said, "you will have strong magic. This magic can give you anything you want." When Paul heard this, his eyes opened wide. He started going to the river every day. He would sit by the water from morning till night, hoping to see these water people. He even paid some good swimmers to dive into the deep parts of the river to look for anything that belonged to the Mer people. Many days passed, and Paul was getting tired. Maybe these water people don't exist, he thought. Then one very hot afternoon, when the sun was high in the sky, something amazing happened. Paul was walking to the river to check his fishing trap when he saw something that made him stop and hide behind a tree. There, sitting on a rock by the river, was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. She was half human, half fish. She was a mermaid, and she was combing her long black hair with a golden comb. But what caught Paul's eye was not the mermaid's beauty. No, what made his heart jump was the beautiful crown beside her. It was shining so bright, it looked like it was made from pieces of the sun. Paul remembered what the stranger had said about getting something from the water people. He looked at the crown and smiled a wicked smile. Very quietly, like a cat hunting a rat, he crept closer to where the mermaid was sitting. The mermaid was so busy combing her hair and singing a beautiful song that she didn't notice Paul. Quick as lightning, Paul grabbed the crown and ran away as fast as his legs could carry him. Behind him, he heard the mermaid scream. The scream was so loud it shook the trees. The river began to rise and fall like it was angry, but Paul didn't look back. He ran and ran until he reached his house. When he got home, Paul locked all his doors and windows. His heart was beating fast as he looked at the crown in his hands. It was even more beautiful up close. It was shining with all the colors of the rainbow. Paul remembered what the stranger had said about wishes. With shaking hands, he held the crown and made his first wish: "I want to be rich." Suddenly, something magical happened. All his empty bags started filling up with gold coins. More and more coins appeared until the bags were bursting. Paul had never seen so much money in his life. He quickly went and bought the finest clothes in the market. He bought expensive shoes and gold rings for his fingers. Now he looked like a rich man. Then Paul went to the palace. When King Solomon saw his old friend dressed like a rich man, his mouth fell open in surprise. But before the king could say anything, Paul pointed his finger at him. "Listen well, King Solomon," Paul said in a loud voice. "I give you 3 days to give Mary back to me. Just 3 days." Then Paul turned and walked out of the palace, leaving everyone wondering what had happened to make Paul so rich and so bold. The mermaid whose crown Paul stole wasn't just any mermaid. She was a princess. She was the daughter of the great king who rules all the water people. When Paul ran away with her crown, she became very angry and upset. She went back home, deep under the water, to tell her father what had happened. The palace of the water people was very beautiful, built with coral and seashells, but on that day, it was filled with sadness and anger. When the Mermaid King heard that someone from the land had stolen his daughter's crown, his anger was terrible to see. The water around him began to boil like hot soup. All the fish swam away in fear. "The land people have gone too far," the Mermaid King shouted. "They must return my daughter's crown, or they will face my anger." The Mermaid King called one of his servants, a friendly water spirit, and said, "Go. Find a fisherman and give him this message for the land people." The next morning, when an old fisherman went to the river to check his nets, something strange happened. A beautiful woman appeared from the water. The fisherman was so scared that he wanted to run, but the water spirit spoke quickly. "Don't be afraid," she said. "I have a message from the king of the water people. Tell your king that someone has stolen our princess's crown. If it is not returned, terrible things will happen to your people." The old fisherman ran to the palace as fast as his legs could carry him. When he told King Solomon the message, the king became very worried. He called all the people of the village together and asked if anyone knew about the missing crown. But nobody said anything because nobody knew that Paul had stolen it. Then the water people began to show their anger. Any fisherman who went to catch fish never came back home. People who went to fetch water or to swim disappeared like smoke. The river that had always been their friend had become their enemy. Every day, people would come to the palace crying. "O King Solomon," they would say, "help us. The river is swallowing our people." King Solomon couldn't sleep at night. Even his wife, Queen Mary, couldn't make him feel better. She would say, "My husband, don't worry. The gods will help us find a way." But the king kept thinking and thinking about what to do. One day, When the king was having a meeting with the village elders to discuss this problem, Paul walked into the palace. He was wearing expensive clothes and had gold rings on all his fingers. He looked at King Solomon and laughed. "Look at you," Paul said. "You call yourself a king, but you can't even protect your people. A king who can't solve problems is not fit to be king." Then Paul said something that made everyone in the palace look at him with surprise. "You will know no peace until you give Mary back to me." After saying this, Paul walked out of the palace. Back in his big new house, Paul was very happy. He would sit and look at the mermaid's crown, which he kept hidden in a special room. "Just wait," he would say to himself. "Soon King Solomon will suffer so much that he will give me Mary. Then I will use my last wish to make her love me forever." But King Solomon was a wise man. He started thinking about everything that had happened. How did Paul suddenly become so rich, he thought. Why is he so confident now? And why did all our troubles start around the same time Paul got his wealth? The king decided to visit the old woman who lived at the edge of the village. This woman was known to be very wise and could talk to the spirits. When the king told her everything that had happened, she threw some special herbs into her fire and started singing. After a while, she looked at the king with serious eyes. "My king," she said, "your old friend Paul is the cause of all these troubles. He stole the mermaid princess's crown. That is why the water people are angry." King Solomon quickly called his palace guards. "Go to Paul's house," he ordered. "Search everywhere until you find the crown." The guards ran to Paul's house and began to search. In a hidden room, they found the crown, shining like the sun. But Paul saw them coming and ran away into the forest like a coward. The guards took the crown back to King Solomon. The king himself went to the river with the crown. He knelt down by the water and said, "People of the water, forgive us. Here is your princess's crown." Then he threw the crown into the river. The moment the crown touched the water, something wonderful happened. The water began to sparkle, and suddenly, all the people who had disappeared came back. The fishermen returned to their families, and those who had been taken while fetching water came back home. Peace returned to our land. The river became friendly again, and the festival of great things started again. Everyone was happy, singing and dancing. Everyone except Paul, who was nowhere to be found. Many days later, a palace guard found a letter. It was from Paul, and it said, "Dear King Solomon, I will come back one day for you. Wait for me." Dear friends, today's story reminds us of the destructive power of jealousy and the importance of guarding our hearts against bitterness. In the tale of Paul and King Solomon, we see how a beautiful friendship was destroyed when Paul allowed envy to take root in his heart, leading him down a dark path that brought suffering not only to himself but to his entire village. As the Bible teaches us in Proverbs 14 verse 30, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Paul's story perfectly illustrates this truth. His inability to rejoice in his friend's happiness led him to make choices that harmed his community and ultimately left him alone, separated from those who once loved him. The story also reminds us of James 3 verse 16. "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." Indeed, Paul's selfish desires and envy led him to steal from the mere people, bringing chaos and suffering to his village. His actions show us that when we let jealousy guide our decisions, we often hurt not only ourselves but also innocent people around us. But there's hope in this story too. King Solomon's wisdom in handling the situation reminds us of Proverbs 16 verse 32. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. Instead of responding with anger or revenge, Solomon sought wisdom and found a way to restore peace to his people. His actions teach us that leadership requires patience, wisdom, and the ability to see beyond personal grievances for the greater good. The key lessons we can learn from this story are: 1. Guard your heart against jealousy, for it can poison even the strongest relationships. 2. True friendship means celebrating others' successes, not resenting them. 3. Seeking revenge often hurts innocent people around us. 4. Wisdom and patience are more powerful than anger and revenge. Friends, if this story has touched your heart and you'd like to hear more tales of wisdom from around the world, please subscribe to our channel. Each week, we share stories that carry profound life lessons, just like this one. Together, we can learn from the wisdom of generations past and apply these timeless truths to our lives today. Until our next story, remember to keep your heart pure and your friendships precious. God bless you all. Folded hands.